My son's wife had a key to my house. She raided my closet while I was at the grocery store. She wore my vintage pearls without asking. She rearranged my kitchen cabinets because she thought my system didn't make sense. She even invited her entire extended family to take over my dining room for Thanksgiving without even giving me a heads up. "You have so much space, Lydia," she'd sneer, while her mother broke my crystal and her kids trampled my white carpets. "It's wasted on just one person." I was 67 years old, yet I felt invisible in the home I had paid for. But what Vernell didn't know was that I was planning something. In absolute silence, I sold the house, furniture included, and bought a cabin in the mountains 700 miles away. I didn't give the address to a soul, not even my own son. I changed the locks the night before I drove away. And when she showed up the next morning, expecting to drop off her kids and raid my pantry, she found a key that wouldn't turn and a stranger inside. Her panic was immediate. My phone blew up with furious voicemails, but I was already crossing state lines, sipping coffee, and driving toward a life where I didn't have to answer to anyone. But let's back up, because to understand how I reached that point, you need to know every humiliation, every invasion, and the exact moment I decided to stop being a doormat and become a ghost. Let me tell you a little about my life before the chaos started. I'm Lydia Biggins. I'm 67 years old, and for the last 3 years, since my husband passed, I've been living a very quiet, very deliberate life here in Sarasota, Florida. I worked as a nurse for 40 years. I spent 4 decades taking care of other people, cleaning up their messes, and managing their crises. When I finally retired, I made a promise to myself. The only person I was going to manage from now on was me. My house reflects that. It's a Spanish-style 3-bedroom place in a nice, quiet cul-de-sac. It's fully paid off, my husband, and I made sure of that. It's my sanctuary. I have pristine white carpets that stay white because I take my shoes off at the door. I have a collection of antique Ladro figurines, delicate porcelain statues that I've been collecting since the 80s. They sit on the mantelpiece, untouched and perfectly arranged. Everything in my home has its place. Everything is peaceful. Or at least it was. My son, Mark, lives about 15 minutes away. Mark is a good man, but he has a blind spot the size of Texas when it comes to his wife, Vernell. Vernell is, how do I say this politely? She is a lot. She is loud. She is chaotic. And she seems to believe that the world exists solely to serve her needs. I have always tried to be the nice mother-in-law. I keep my mouth shut. I smile at family dinners. I help out when asked. But I value my privacy. A few months ago, I gave Mark a spare key to my house. It was strictly for emergencies. I told him, "Mark, this is if I fall and can't get up, or if there's a hurricane, and I'm out of town." He promised me it would stay on his keychain. I trusted him. That was my first mistake. It was a Tuesday morning around 10:30. I had just gone to the grocery store to pick up some produce and a bottle of wine for myself. It was already getting hot outside, that sticky Florida humidity that hits you the moment you step out of the air conditioning. I pulled into my driveway and noticed something odd immediately. The front door was unlocked. Now, I know I locked that door. I am a creature of habit. I check the lock 3 times before I get in the car. My heart started hammering in my chest. I thought I was being robbed. I left the groceries in the trunk and walked up the driveway slowly, clutching my keys between my knuckles like a weapon. I pushed the door open and stepped into the foyer. I didn't hear a burglar. I heard the television. Specifically, I heard my television, and I smelled something that didn't belong in my house. It was a heavy, sweet perfume, the kind that lingers in a room for 3 days after the person leaves. It was Vernell's perfume. "Hello," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. In here, Lydia. Vernell's voice drifted out from the back of the house. She didn't sound startled. She didn't sound apologetic. She sounded like she was inviting me into her living room. I walked past the living room. There was a half-empty iced coffee sitting on my coffee table. No coaster, just sweating condensation directly onto the wood. My stomach tightened. I walked down the hallway toward the master bedroom. The door was wide open, and there she was. Vernell was standing in front of my full-length mirror. She wasn't just visiting. She was shopping. My closet doors were thrown open. My clothes were pulled out on the bed. And Vernell was wearing my vintage pearl necklace, the one my husband gave me for our 30th anniversary. She was turning side to side, admiring herself in the glass. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just stared at her. It felt like a violation. That bedroom was the space I shared with my husband. Those pearls were sentimental. They weren't costume jewelry for her to play dress up with. Vernell, I said. My voice came out sharper than I intended. She turned around and smiled, completely unbothered. Oh, hey, you're back early. I thought you'd be at that garden club thing you do on Tuesdays. She knew my schedule. She had planned this. What are you doing? I asked. I walked over and took the pearls off her neck. I couldn't help it. I didn't want them touching her skin. And how did you get in here? Mark gave me the key, she said, waving her hand dismissively. I have a charity luncheon tomorrow, and I have absolutely nothing to wear. I remembered you have all these vintage pieces just sitting here gathering dust, so I thought I'd pop over and see what I could borrow. She said borrow, but the way she was looking at my things didn't feel like borrowing. It felt like claiming. Vernell, I said, trying to keep the shake out of my voice. Mark has that key for emergencies, not for you to come over here when I'm not home and go through my closet. She rolled her eyes, actually rolled them, like I was being a dramatic teenager. Oh, Lydia, don't be so stiff. We're family. What's yours is mine, right? I mean, who else is going to wear this stuff? You barely go out anymore. That sentence hit me like a slap in the face. You barely go out anymore. It wasn't just an insult. It was a revealing of her mindset. She saw me as done. She saw me as an old woman sitting in a big house waiting to die, so she could inherit the spoils. In her mind, she was just getting a head start on taking what she believed would eventually be hers anyway. I go out plenty, I said, clutching the pearls in my hand. And even if I didn't, these are my things. This is my house. You cannot just walk in here whenever you want. You need to call me. Vernell sighed, the way you sigh at a toddler who won't eat their peas. She grabbed her purse off my bed, where she had sat it right on top of my clean duvet, and started walking toward the door. Okay, relax. I didn't take anything. I was just looking. God, you're so touchy lately. You really need to loosen up, Lydia. It's not healthy to be this uptight alone in a big house. She walked past me, the smell of her perfume choking the air in my bedroom. She stopped at the doorway and looked back, not to apologize, but to add one last little dig. I'm leaving the iced coffee on the table. You can have it. Consider it a thank you for letting me look. She breezed out of the house. I heard the front door slam shut, rattling the frames on the wall. I stood there in the middle of my bedroom, holding my husband's pearls. I looked at the closet doors she had left open. I looked at the drawers she had not fully closed. I walked out to the living room and saw the water ring on my coffee table where her cup had been. I felt a knot form in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't just anger. It was fear. Because I realized in that moment that Vernell didn't respect me. She didn't fear me. And she certainly didn't see this as my home. She saw it as an extension of her own property that I was just temporarily occupying. What's yours is mine, she had said. She actually believed that. I walked to the front door and locked it. I threw the deadbolt, but as I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, I knew that a lock wasn't going to be enough. A lock keeps out strangers. It doesn't keep out family who think they own you. I didn't know it yet, standing there in the silence of my living room, but the war had just started, and Vernell had fired the first shot. She thought she was dealing with a sweet, retired grandmother who would just roll over and take it to keep the peace. She had no idea who she was messing with. If I thought the incident with the pearls was the climax of the drama, I was sorely mistaken. It turned out that was just the opening ceremony. Over the next 4 weeks, the boundaries I had spent a lifetime building didn't just erode. They were bulldozed, flattened, and paved over by Vernell's absolute refusal to hear the word no. It started with the grandchildren. Now, don't get me wrong. I love my grandkids. Sammy is 8 and Chloe is 6, and they're the lights of my life. But I am a grandmother, not a daycare center. There is a difference. A week after I found Vernell in my closet, I was sitting on my back patio, enjoying a cup of coffee and the silence of the morning. I had a plan for the day. I was going to repot my orchids and then read a book. That was it. That was the luxury of retirement. At 9 a.m. sharp, a car horn honked in my driveway. Not a friendly beep, but a long, impatient blast. I walked to the front window and saw Vernell's SUV idling. The back doors flew open, and Sammy and Chloe tumbled out onto my lawn with their backpacks. Before I could even open the front door, Vernell's window rolled down. "Thanks, Lydia. You're a lifesaver," she shouted over the engine. My nail tech had a cancellation and squeezed me in, and then I have to run to the mall. I'll pick them up around 4. She didn't ask. She didn't wait to see if I was home. She didn't wait to see if I was sick or busy or leaving. She just assumed. "Vernell, wait." I called out, opening the door. "I have plans today." She pretended she didn't hear me. She just waved, rolled the window up, and peeled out of the driveway, leaving 2 confused children standing on my grass. I looked at Sammy and Chloe. They looked back at me. "Mom said you were lonely," Chloe said innocently. My heart sank. I wasn't lonely. I was busy. But to Vernell, my time had 0 value. In her mind, because I wasn't punching a clock at the hospital anymore. I was just a free resource waiting to be utilized. I canceled my plans. I spent the day making grilled cheese sandwiches and watching cartoons, stewing in a silent rage. That was the new normal. But the invasion of my physical space is what really started to mess with my head. A few days later, I came home from a dental appointment to find Vernell's car in the driveway again. My stomach dropped. I walked into the kitchen, and the first thing I noticed was the noise. She was banging pots and pans around. "Vernell," I asked, dropping my keys on the counter. She was standing on a step stool, her head inside my upper cabinets. The counters were covered in my spices, my canned goods, and my dishes. "Oh, hey," she said, not looking down. "I was looking for the paprika earlier, and I realized your system in here is a total mess. It makes no sense. So I'm fixing it for you." She was fixing my kitchen. The kitchen I had cooked in for 20 years. "I know where everything is, Vernell," I said, feeling my blood pressure spike. "Please put it back." "Nonsense," she said, climbing down and dusting off her hands. I moved the spices near the stove where they belong, and I put the plates in the lower drawer so the kids can reach them. And I threw out some stuff that looked old. "Honestly, Lydia, I don't know how you found anything in here. It was chaotic." I walked over to the trash can. Inside, I saw a bag of specialty flour I had bought just last week and a container of expensive tea. "This wasn't old," I said, my voice trembling. "This was imported tea." "It didn't have a date on it," she shrugged. "Better safe than sorry. You know, as you get older, you have to be careful about hoarding expired food." My friend's mom got food poisoning that way. We just want to keep you safe. There it was again. The subtle implication that I was losing my grip, that I was a senile old woman who couldn't be trusted to tell fresh tea from poison. She wasn't reorganizing my kitchen to be helpful. She was reorganizing it to suit her preferences because she treated my house like her secondary residence. Every time I reached for a coffee mug that week, it wasn't there. Every time I looked for the salt, it had moved. It leaves you feeling unsettled, like the ground is shifting under your feet. It made me feel like a guest in my own life. But the final straw, the moment that actually broke me, was the holiday hostage situation. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. For the first time in years, I wanted something small. Just me, Mark, Vernell, and the kids. Maybe a roasted chicken instead of a 20-pound turkey. Minimal cleanup, maximum relaxation. I called Mark to suggest it. He said he'd run it by Vernell. The next day, Vernell walked into my house without knocking. She still had that key and flopped onto my sofa. "So, Mark told me you want to do Thanksgiving," she said. "That's great because our oven is acting funny." So I went ahead and invited my parents, my sister, her husband, and their 3 kids. Oh, and my cousin Ray might come if he's in town. I stared at her. I did the math in my head. That was 12 people. 12 people. "Vernell," I said, "I told Mark I wanted a quiet dinner. I am not cooking for 12 people. I'm 67 years old. I don't have the energy to host a banquet." "Oh, don't worry about the cooking," she said dismissively. "We'll do it potluck style. But we need to do it here. Your dining room is the only one big enough to seat everyone. Plus, you have the good china. My mom loves your china." "I didn't invite your parents," I said. I tried to be firm. "I don't want a house full of people." She looked at me like I had just kicked a puppy. "But I already told them yes. They booked their flights. Lydia, you can't cancel now. That would be so rude. My mother is really looking forward to seeing the house." She had trapped me. If I said no, I was the villain who ruined Thanksgiving and wasted her parents' plane tickets. If I said yes, I was a slave to a party I didn't want. "I'm not doing it," I said. "Host it at your house. Rent tables if you have to." "We can't," she snapped. "Our house is messy. Yours is perfect. Why are you being so difficult?" She stormed out, leaving me shaking. I picked up the phone and called Mark. I needed my son to step up. I needed him to be the barrier between me and his wife's insanity. "Mark," I said when he answered, "you need to fix this." Vernell invited her entire extended family to my house for Thanksgiving without asking me. "I told you I wanted a quiet dinner." Mark let out a long, heavy sigh. It was the sound of a man who just wanted to watch football and not deal with his mother. "Mom," he said, and his tone was patronizing, "is it really that big of a deal? Vernell is under a lot of stress. She just wants a nice holiday for her family." "It's my house, Mark," I said. "My privacy." I know," he said. "But the house is sitting there. It's huge. You're there all by yourself with empty rooms. Just let her have this. It makes her happy. You have so much space, Mom. Why are you being so selfish?" The word hung in the air. Selfish. I had paid for Mark's college. I had helped them with the down payment on their house. I had babysat for free for 8 years. I had nursed my husband through cancer in this house. And now, because I didn't want to host a dozen strangers and let them trample my carpets, I was selfish. Selfish. I repeated quietly. "Look, just do it for me, okay?" Mark said, "I have to go. Love you." He hung up. I sat there in my kitchen, the kitchen where I couldn't find my own coffee mugs anymore, and I felt something snap. It wasn't a loud snap. It was quiet. It was the sound of a tether breaking. I realized then that I wasn't the matriarch of this family. I wasn't the beloved mother and grandmother. To them, I was just staff. I was the caretaker of the facility. I was the woman who paid the bills, kept the air conditioning running, and polished the silver so Vernell could show it off to her mother. They didn't love me. They loved what I provided. Mark thought I was selfish? Fine. I looked around my pristine, beautiful kitchen. I looked at the calendar on the wall, where Thanksgiving was written in Vernell's handwriting, not mine. If they thought I was selfish now, they hadn't seen anything yet. I stood up. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just walked over to the calendar, took it off the wall, and dropped it into the trash can right on top of my imported tea. I was done being the victim. It was time to become the problem. Thanksgiving arrived, and just as I feared, my home was no longer my home. It was a banquet hall, and I was the reluctant proprietor. By noon, there were 14 people in my house. Vernell's parents, her sister, the loud husband, the screaming children, and a cousin I had never met who tracked mud onto my white carpet within 3 minutes of walking through the door. The noise was deafening. It wasn't the warm, happy buzz of a family holiday. It was a roar. The television was blasting a football game at maximum volume. The kitchen was a disaster zone of grease and flour. Vernell was barking orders at everyone, acting like the lady of the manor, while I stood in the corner, clutching a dish towel, trying to stay out of the way. I tried to be gracious. I really did. I poured wine. I smiled at insults disguised as jokes. I bit my tongue when Vernell's father put his feet, shoes still on, up on my coffee table. But the moment that solidified my resolve happened right before dinner. I was in the dining room, setting out the crystal wine glasses. These weren't just any glasses. They were Waterford crystal, a wedding gift from 45 years ago. I only brought them out for special occasions. Vernell's mother, a woman named Janice who had been complaining about the humidity since she landed, reached across the table to grab a roll. Her elbow caught the stem of one of the goblets. It happened in slow motion. The glass tipped, hit the edge of the table, and shattered on the hardwood floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the room. The room went quiet for a second. I stared at the shards of crystal glistening near my feet. That glass had toasted my husband's promotion. It had toasted my son's graduation. It was history. Janice didn't gasp. She didn't rush to help. She looked down at the mess, then looked at me and shrugged. "Oh, well," Janice said, popping a piece of bread into her mouth. "It's just a glass, Lydia. Don't look so tragic. It was probably old anyway." She didn't apologize. She didn't offer to sweep it up. She just dismissed my loss, as if my possessions were trash waiting to be broken. Vernell chimed in from the kitchen doorway. "Mom's right, Lydia. You have 11 others. It's not a big deal. Mark, get the broom." Mark got the broom. He swept up his father's wedding gift while his wife rolled her eyes. I didn't say a word. I didn't yell. I felt a cold calmness settle over me, like ice water in my veins. I realized then that screaming wouldn't fix this. You can't teach respect to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. I needed a moment to breathe, so I walked down the hallway toward the guest bathroom. As I passed the guest bedroom, the one Vernell was using as a staging area for her family's coats and bags, I heard voices. The door was cracked open just an inch. It was Vernell and her sister. I stopped. I know eavesdropping is rude, but after the day I'd had, I felt entitled to some intelligence gathering. "It's a great house," the sister was saying, "but it smells like old lady." Vernell laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound. "I know, but look at the bones of the place. The master suite is huge. Once we get rid of that dusty furniture and rip up this carpet, it'll be modern." "When do you think that will happen?" the sister asked. "She seems pretty healthy." She's slowing down, Vanell said confidently. Mark says she's tired all the time. Give it a year, maybe two. Eventually, when she gets too old to manage the stairs or drives us crazy, we'll move in here. We can put her in the guest suite at the back. It has its own bathroom, so she'll be out of the way. Honestly, this house is wasted on one person. It's practically criminal for her to hoard all this square footage while we're cramped in our place. I stood frozen in the hallway, my breath hitched in my throat. There was the plan, laid out in plain English. They weren't just rude, they were waiting. They were vultures circling, waiting for me to weaken just enough so they could swoop in, take the master bedroom, and shove me into the back room like a piece of unwanted furniture. Guest suite. That was code for out of sight, out of mind. I didn't go to the bathroom. I turned around and walked back to the dining room. I sat down at the head of the table. I ate my dry turkey. I listened to Janice complain about the stuffing, but I wasn't really there. I was calculating. If I fought them, they would gaslight me. They would tell Mark I was being paranoid, that I was getting senile. If I kicked them out, Mark would cut me off from the grandkids. I couldn't win a war of words with Vernell. She was louder than me, so I decided not to fight. I decided to disappear. The next day, after the last of the relatives finally left and the house was silent again, I put my plan into motion. Step one was camouflage. I needed them to think they were winning. I called Mark 3 days later. I made my voice sound weak, a little raspy. Mark, I said, I'm just so exhausted. That party took everything out of me. I think I need to rest for a while. I'm going to take a break from hosting dinners or babysitting for a few weeks. I just need to sleep. Mark sounded relieved. Oh, sure, Mom. Take your time. Vernell said you seemed a little out of it. Get some rest. He bought it. Vernell bought it. They thought I was fading. Perfect. That gave me the one thing I desperately needed, time without them popping over. Step 2 was the exit strategy. I knew I couldn't list the house with a regular realtor. A for sale sign in the front yard would be a beacon. The neighbors would see it and call Vernell immediately. Gossip travels faster than light in this neighborhood. I went online and found a real estate investment group. Not the predatory ones that put cardboard signs on telephone poles, but a reputable firm that bought properties for cash. As is. I called them on a burner phone I bought at Walmart. I didn't want the calls showing up on my main bill if Mark ever looked. A man named Mr. Henderson came over the next day. He drove a plain sedan. I told him the situation plainly. I want a quick sale. I told him. Cash. Closing in 30 days. And I am leaving everything. The furniture, the appliances, the curtains. I am walking out with my clothes and my jewelry. I want to sell it furnished. He looked around at my pristine living room, the Ladro figurines, the expensive sofas. Mrs. Biggins, are you sure you could get more on the open market? I don't want more money. I said, I want speed. And I want silence. Can you close without a sign in the yard? Absolutely, he said. We signed the preliminary papers right there on my dining room table, the same table where Janice had broken my glass. Step 3 was the destination. I spent my nights on my iPad, browsing Zillow. I knew I couldn't stay in Florida. It was too hot, too flat, and too close to the memories of being disrespected. I wanted the opposite of Sarasota. I typed in Asheville, North Carolina. I had visited there once with my husband. Years ago, I remembered the Blue Ridge Mountains. I remembered the cool, crisp air that didn't feel like a wet blanket. I looked at small cabins. I didn't want a big house anymore. I didn't want a guest suite for anyone. I wanted a cozy 2-bedroom cottage with a fireplace and a deck where I could drink coffee and see nothing but trees. I found one. It was a log cabin in a gated community outside of the city. It had a view of the sunset, and, more importantly, a 24-hour security guard at the front gate. No one was getting in there without my permission. I looked at the photos of the cabin, and for the first time in months, the knot in my stomach loosened. I wasn't the old lady in the guest suite. I was a woman starting over. Vernell thought the house was wasted on me. She thought I was slowing down. She had no idea. I was just shifting gears. The silence in my house wasn't the silence of decay. It was the silence of a soldier preparing for a covert operation. I poured myself a glass of wine, in a standard glass, not crystal, and toasted to the empty room. To the guest suite, I whispered, "May Vernell enjoy it more than I ever will." There is a specific kind of clarity that comes when you stop caring about what people think and start caring about your own survival. For 30 days, I operated like a ghost in my own life. While Vernell and Mark thought I was resting, recovering from holiday fatigue, I was dismantling my entire existence in Sarasota and packing it into a getaway car. The logistics were the easy part. As a nurse, I spent 40 years managing charts, medications, and schedules. I know how to organize a timeline. The first step was the house. Mr. Henderson, the investor, was as good as his word. The paperwork was straightforward. He didn't care about the memories in the walls or the height marks on the doorframe where Mark grew up. He cared about the square footage and the zip code. We settled on a price that was fair, slightly below market value, but it was all cash, and more importantly, it was immediate. The sticking point for most people would have been the furniture. A lifetime of accumulation. The mahogany dining set that seated 12. The heavy oak bedroom suite. The Ladro figurines on the mantel. I walked through the living room one Tuesday morning, coffee in hand, looking at it all. I thought about Vernell's comment. Once we get rid of that dusty furniture. I realized then that these weren't my treasures anymore. They were just things. Heavy, burdensome things. If I took them with me, I'd have to hire movers. I'd have to pay thousands of dollars to haul furniture up a mountain into a smaller cabin where it wouldn't even fit. And if I left them here for Mark and Vernell to sort through later, I was just giving them exactly what they wanted. So I made a decision that felt incredibly reckless and incredibly freeing. I included everything in the sale. I called Mr. Henderson. "I'm leaving it all," I said. "The sofas, the beds, the dining table, the china in the hutch. Take it." "Everything?" he asked, surprised. "Mrs. Biggins, you have some nice antiques." "I don't want them," I said. "I'm selling it furnished. But I want a clause in the contract. I want an estate liquidator to come in the day after I hand over the keys to Tag and sell whatever you don't want. I want the house cleared out professionally." "Done," he said. It was scorched earth. I wasn't burning the house down, but I was scrubbing it clean of my essence. By the time Vernell got inside, she wouldn't find a family heirloom to claim. She would find a price tag. With the Sarasota sale pending, I turned my attention to North Carolina. Technology is a wonderful thing. I didn't need to fly up there. I took a virtual tour of the cabin in Asheville. I saw the stone fireplace, the small but updated kitchen, and the deck that looked out over a canopy of pine trees. It was small, only 1,200 square feet, but it was mine. I wired the deposit from my savings account. I signed the closing documents electronically using DocuSign on my iPad while sitting at my kitchen island. It was surreal. I had just bought a new life with a few taps of my finger, all while Mark was texting me to ask if I could pick up the kids from soccer practice next Tuesday. I replied, "Sorry, still not feeling up to driving that far." He sent back a thumbs-up emoji. He didn't even call to check on me. That thumbs-up was the final permission slip I needed to stop feeling guilty. Then came the packing. This was the hardest part, not physically, but emotionally. I had to decide what constituted Lydia. Not Lydia the mother, not Lydia the wife, but just Lydia. I bought heavy-duty plastic bins, the kind that stack easily in the back of an SUV. I went into the master bedroom and closed the door. First, the clothes. I took my comfortable sweaters, my good walking shoes, and my favorite coats. I left the formal dresses I wore to charity galas. I wouldn't need them in the mountains. I left the uncomfortable heels. Then the jewelry. I opened my jewelry box and took out the pearl necklace Vernell had been wearing. I held it for a moment, remembering how it looked on her neck, how entitled she felt to it. I wrapped it carefully in velvet and put it in my carry-on bag. I took my wedding ring, my diamond studs, and the gold bracelet my mother left me. I went to the mantel and took down the urn. My husband, David, he had always hated the humidity here. One day, Liddy, he used to say, we'll move somewhere where the leaves actually change color. We're going, David, I whispered, placing the urn securely in a padded box. I packed the photo albums, the real ones from before everything went digital. Baby pictures of Mark, wedding photos, Christmases from the 90s when we were all happy. I couldn't leave those. They were proof that I had loved them, even if they had forgotten it. By the time I was finished, I had 12 bins stacked in the garage next to my Toyota Highlander. The rest of the house looked exactly the same. The beds were made. The towels were folded. The coffee maker was on the counter. To the untrained, it looked like I was just going out for milk. The night before I left, I set the final trap. I knew that when I disappeared, Mark and Vernell would come over. They would use the emergency key, or try to, and when they couldn't get in, they would panic. Eventually, they would get inside. I needed to leave something for them, not a suicide note, not a tearful letter of resignation. I went to my study and printed out a stack of documents. These were copies of the final transfer of deed to the investment company, but I put them in a thick, cream-colored legal folder. On the front of the folder, in bold black marker, I wrote, House Transfer Documents, Mark and Vernell. I placed the folder right in the center of the kitchen island. It was the perfect bait. When they saw that, their greedy little hearts would skip a beat. They would think, finally, she did it. She signed the house over to us. They would rush to open it, expecting a deed with their names on it. Instead, they would open it and read the cover sheet. Sale agreement between Lydia Biggins and Henderson Property Holdings, LLC. They would read that the house they were standing in, the house they had measured for drapes and planned to renovate, was no longer family property. It belonged to a corporation, and they were trespassing. I stood in the kitchen and looked at that folder one last time. It was cruel, perhaps, but it was necessary. It was the only way to make them understand that my boundaries were no longer suggestions. They were legal contracts. I turned off the kitchen light. The folder sat there in the dark, a time bomb waiting for the moment Vernell decided to invade my space one last time. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic, waiting for the sun to rise. I was ready. The earth was scorched. The past was packed. Tomorrow I would drive. 4 a.m. is a strange time of day. It's too late to be night, but too early to be morning. It's a quiet liminal space where the world feels like it's holding its breath. For the last 3 years, waking up at 4 a.m. usually meant I couldn't sleep because I was worrying about something, Mark's job, the leaky faucet, or Vernell's latest passive-aggressive comment. But this morning, 4 a.m. felt like the starting gun. I moved through the house like a shadow. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need to. I knew every creak of the floorboards by heart. I picked up my purse, grabbed my large travel mug of black coffee, and walked out to the garage. The air was heavy and thick, that familiar Florida humidity that sticks to your skin the second you step outside. Usually it annoyed me. Today I just thought goodbye. I got into my Highlander, pressed the garage door opener, and watched the door roll up. The street was empty. The neighbors' houses were dark. No one saw me back out. No one saw me pause for just a second at the end of the driveway to look back at the house that had been my entire world for 30 years. I didn't feel a tear roll down my cheek. I didn't feel a pang of regret. I shifted the car into drive and whispered, "Good luck, Mark." Then I turned onto the main road and headed for Interstate 75. The drive north out of Florida is long. If you've ever done it, you know it can be mind-numbing. It's miles and miles of flat land, billboards, and pine trees. But to me, every mile marker passing by felt like a chain link snapping off my ankles. By the time the sun started to come up, painting the sky in pinks and oranges, I was passing Ocala. The traffic was light. I put on an audiobook, a mystery novel I had been meaning to read for months, but never had the time because I was too busy running errands for people who didn't appreciate it. I crossed the Florida-Georgia line around 8:30 a.m. There's a big sign that welcomes you to Georgia, and usually when you cross a state line, nothing really changes. The trees look the same. The road looks the same. But physically, I felt a shift. My shoulders, which had been up around my ears for months, finally dropped. The knot in my stomach that appeared every time I heard Vernell's car in my driveway began to unravel. I wasn't Lydia, the doormat, anymore. I was just a woman on a highway. I stopped for gas near Valdosta and bought a bag of salty peanuts and a fresh coffee. I felt giddy, almost like a teenager skipping school. I was doing something forbidden. I was prioritizing myself. Then, at exactly 10:15 a.m., the bubble burst. My phone was mounted on the dashboard for the GPS. It had been silent all morning. Suddenly, the screen lit up, cutting off the narrator of my audiobook. "Incoming call, Vernell." My heart did that familiar stutter step, that conditioned response of fear and obligation. What does she want? Is someone hurt? Then I looked at the clock. It was Tuesday morning. And then I remembered. Vernell had mentioned last week, in passing, not asking, just stating that she had a hair appointment this Tuesday and that the kids had a half day at school. She was at my house. She was trying to drop the kids off. I let it ring. The phone went silent. Then, immediately, it rang again. "Incoming call, Vernell." I kept my hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. I didn't answer. Then came the text message ping. Then another. Then the phone rang a third time. This time, I saw the caller ID change. "Incoming call, Mark." She had called him. She was tattletaling. "Mom isn't answering the door." I saw a sign for a rest area 1 mile ahead. I decided to pull over, not because I was going to turn around, and not because I was going to apologize. I pulled over because I wanted to savor this. I wanted to hear the moment they realized I was gone. I parked the car under a shade tree, far away from the trucks. I took a deep breath, picked up my phone, and opened my voicemail. There were 3 messages. I played the first one. It was Vernell. Her voice was tight, that fake sweet tone she used when she was trying to manipulate me. "Hey, Lydia, it's me. I'm outside. The kids are here. I know you're home because your car is gone, but the garage is closed. Maybe you're in the shower? Anyway, I'm running late for my highlights. I'm just going to let myself in with the key and get the kids set up on the iPad. Call me when you get this." I smiled. She had no idea. I played the second message, left 4 minutes later. The tone had changed. The sweetness was gone. "Lydia, I'm trying the key and it's not turning. Did you change the locks? It's not wiggling or anything. I'm standing out here in the heat with Sammy and Chloe. Sammy has to pee. This isn't funny. Open the door. My appointment is in 20 minutes. And then the third message. This one was pure, unadulterated rage. Lydia, pick up the phone. I called Mark, and he said you aren't answering him either. This is ridiculous. I know you're in there. I can't believe you would change the locks without telling us. We're family. I have things to do. You are being so incredibly selfish right now. Open the door. In the background of the message, I could hear Sammy whining, Mom, I need to go, and Vernell snapping, Hold it, Sammy. I ended the call. I sat there in the quiet of my car. A bird was chirping on a branch nearby. A semi-truck rumbled past on the highway. She called me selfish. Again, she was standing on my porch, banging on a door that no longer opened for her, demanding entry to a house that was no longer mine, to drop off children she hadn't asked me to watch, so she could go get her hair done. And I was the selfish one. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I looked at the phone in my hand. It started ringing again. Vernell. I didn't feel guilty. That was the surprise. I expected guilt. I expected to feel like a bad grandmother. But all I felt was a profound sense of justice. She was experiencing a natural consequence of her actions for the first time in years. She had assumed I would always be there, like a sturdy piece of furniture. Well, the furniture had moved. I tapped the screen. I went to my settings. Block caller. Then I went to Mark's contact. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. He was my son, after all. But he had enabled this. He had told me to stop being selfish. He needed a wake-up call, too. Block caller. I put the phone back in the mount. I didn't want to hear the fallout. I didn't want to read the nasty texts. I wanted to drive through the mountains. I pulled back onto the highway. As I crossed into Tennessee, the terrain started to change. The flatlands rose up into rolling hills. The air outside the car, when I cracked the window, smelled like pine and damp earth, not swamp water. I saw the silhouette of the Smoky Mountains in the distance, blue and hazy against the horizon. They looked solid, unmovable, peaceful. I turned my audiobook back on. I took a sip of my coffee. I had 48 hours of silence ahead of me before I reached Asheville and turned my phone back on. Vernell would have to figure out her own childcare. Mark would have to listen to his wife scream without me there to absorb the blow. For the first time in my life, that wasn't my problem. I just kept driving. And with every mile, I felt a little more like Lydia Biggins and a little less like Mark's mom. The mountains were calling, and I was finally answering. While I was crossing the border into Tennessee, buying a bag of trail mix, and breathing in air that didn't feel like a wet wool blanket, absolute chaos was unfolding back in Sarasota. I wasn't there to see it, of course. That was the whole point. But between the barrage of voicemails I listened to later, the text logs, and the reluctant confession Mark gave me weeks down the road, I can picture the scene perfectly. It played out exactly like a tragic comedy. And for the first time in 30 years, I wasn't the one tasked with cleaning up the mess. It started around 11 a.m. After I blocked their numbers, Vernell evidently panicked. Not because she was worried about my health, but because her day was being inconvenienced. She called Mark at work. She told him I wasn't answering the door. My car was gone, but the garage was closed. And crucially, her key wouldn't turn in the lock. Mark, to his credit, went straight to worst-case scenario. He didn't think Mom is on a road trip. He thought Mom has had a stroke inside the house and is lying on the kitchen floor. He left work in the middle of a meeting and sped over. When he pulled into the driveway, Vernell was pacing on the front porch, sweating in the humidity, with Sammy and Chloe sitting on the steps playing on their iPads, bored out of their minds. Mark banged on the door. Mom, are you in there? Silence. He tried to peer through the front windows, but I had closed the blinds before I left. He tried the back door. Locked. He tried the garage keypad. I had changed the code the morning I left. That's when the panic really set in. Mark called a locksmith. He told them it was a medical emergency. The locksmith arrived 20 minutes later. A guy named Dave. Mark told me later that Dave took one look at Vernell, who was tapping her foot and checking her watch, and knew something was off. I need proof of residence. Dave said, "It's my mother's house." Mark yelled, "She might be dying in there. Just drill the lock." Dave drilled the lock. The sound of metal grinding on metal must have echoed through the whole neighborhood. Finally, the tumbler gave way. Mark kicked the door open and rushed in, screaming my name. "Mom! Mom!" He expected to find a body. He expected to hear the TV on. He expected the smell of my cooking. Instead, he found silence. And he found Gary. Gary was the estate liquidator I had hired. He was a tall, thin man with a clipboard and no patience for nonsense. When Mark burst through the door, Gary was standing in the dining room. He was calmly placing a neon green sticker that said Lot 42 on the mahogany dining table, the one Vernell had planned to inherit. Mark stopped dead in his tracks. Vernell pushed past him, dragging the kids. "Who are you?" Mark shouted, his adrenaline still pumping. "Where is my mother?" Gary didn't flinch. He just looked up from his clipboard, adjusted his glasses, and said, "I'm the liquidator. Who are you?" "I'm her son." Mark yelled, "What have you done with her? Is she hurt?" "Mrs. Biggins is not here," Gary said calmly. "The house is empty of occupants. I'm just cataloging the inventory for the sale." Vernell stepped forward, her face turning a dangerous shade of red. "Sale? What sale? What are you talking about? This is my mother-in-law's house. Get away from that table." Gary looked at Vernell, then at the sticker on the table, then back at Vernell. "Ma'am, I have a contract signed by Lydia Biggins to liquidate the contents of this property. The house has been sold to Henderson Property Holdings. The new owners take possession on Monday. I have until Sunday night to tag and clear everything." The room went dead silent. Mark told me he felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. "Sold," he whispered. "That's impossible." She didn't say anything. "She signed the closing documents yesterday," Gary said. He pointed toward the kitchen. "She left a file for you on the island." Mark walked into the kitchen like a zombie. There it was, the cream-colored folder I had left the night before. House transfer documents, Mark and Vernell. Vernell saw it, and her eyes lit up for a split second. She grabbed it before Mark could touch it. "See," she said, tearing it open. "She probably transferred it to us to avoid the taxes. She's just being dramatic about moving to a condo or something." Vernell ripped the papers out. She scanned the first page. Then the second. Her hands started to shake. It wasn't a deed of gift. It was a copy of the sale agreement. It listed the purchase price. It listed the closing date. And it listed the condition, property to be sold furnished. Seller retains no rights to contents remaining on premises after departure. She sold it, Vernell whispered. Her voice cracked. She sold it to a company. Then, the realization hit her. She looked around the kitchen. She looked at the mixer she liked to use. She looked at the expensive espresso machine I had bought last Christmas. She looked through the doorway at the living room, at the Ladro figurines she had already mentally claimed for eBay. She sold the furniture? Vernell shrieked. It wasn't a question. It was a high-pitched accusation. "She can't do that. That's family property. Mark, do something. That dining set has been in the family for 30 years. She can't just sell it to a stranger." Gary, who was still tagging items in the other room, called out, Actually, she can, and she did. Everything with a green sticker is being auctioned off on Saturday. If you want it, you're welcome to come back and bid. Vernell looked at Mark. She's crazy. Your mother has lost her mind. We have to call a lawyer. We have to stop this. Mark, call the police. But Mark wasn't looking at Vernell. He was looking at the bottom of the document where my signature was sitting in blue ink, crisp, steady, deliberate. He realized in that moment that I wasn't senile. I wasn't having a breakdown. I had outmaneuvered them. She's not crazy, Vernell, Mark said quietly. She's gone. Well, find her. Vernell yelled. She can't just leave. Who is going to watch the kids next week when we go to Cabo? Who is going to host Christmas? Mark. She has responsibilities. That was it. That was the sentence that finally broke through to my son. She has responsibilities. Not, is she okay? Not, is she safe? But who is going to serve us? Mark pulled out his phone. He dialed my number again. It went straight to voicemail. One ring, then the click. The subscriber you are trying to reach is not accepting calls at this time. He tried to text me. Delivered but not read. He looked at the empty counters. He saw that the photos on the fridge were gone. The magnet collection was gone. The only thing left was the stuff they wanted. I had taken the Lydia out of the house and left them with the stuff. She blocked us, Mark said. He sat down on one of the bar stools, a stool that now had a green price tag on the leg. She actually blocked us. Vernell was pacing the kitchen, opening drawers. She left the silverware, she muttered. Okay, we can take the silverware now. Grab a box, Mark. And the TV in the den. If she sold it, she clearly doesn't want it, so we should take it before this guy sells it. Mark looked at his wife, really looked at her. He saw her raiding his mother's cabinets, while the reality that his mother had fled the state washed over him. Stop it, Vernell, Mark snapped. What? She said, holding a handful of serving spoons. Put it back, he said. It's not ours. The man said it's sold. We are trespassing. I am not trespassing in my inheritance. Vernell screamed. It's not your inheritance. Mark shouted back, his voice echoing off the empty walls. It's gone. It's all gone. Because we pushed her too far. Are you happy now? You wanted the house. Well, look around. It's sold. You wanted her out of the way? She's gone. Vernell stood there, mouth open, holding the spoons. Sammy and Chloe started crying in the living room because the strange man was putting stickers on the TV and wouldn't let them watch Bluey. Mark put his head in his hands. He finally understood. I hadn't just moved. I had resigned. I had looked at the job description of being his mother, the thankless, boundaryless, endless servitude, and I had quit. Gary walked into the kitchen, checked his watch, and looked at them. Folks, he said, I need to lock up. You need to leave. The new owners are doing a walkthrough tomorrow. Mark stood up. He took the spoons out of Vernell's hand and dropped them onto the counter with a loud clatter. He grabbed her arm, grabbed the kids, and walked out of the house. He told me later that as he backed out of the driveway, he looked at the house one last time. He realized he didn't even know where I was. I was a ghost. And the scariest part for him wasn't that I was gone. It was that he knew deep down that I was probably happier than I had been in years. He was right. While they were fighting in the driveway, I was driving through the Blue Ridge Mountains, singing along to the radio, feeling the wind in my hair. The nightmare in Sarasota was over. My life was just beginning. 2 weeks. That is exactly how long it took for my nervous system to reset. For the first time in 30 years, I wasn't waking up with my jaw clenched. I was waking up to the sound of wind moving through pine trees and the chirping of cardinals. My new cabin in Asheville was everything the Sarasota house wasn't. It was small. It was cozy. It smelled like cedar and wood smoke, not bleach and Vernell's overwhelming perfume. I had spent the last 14 days quietly unpacking my life. I put my husband's urn on the mantel above the stone fireplace. I hung my clothes in a closet that only I occupied. I drank my coffee on the back deck, wrapped in a thick wool cardigan, watching the mist roll off the Blue Ridge Mountains. It was cool, crisp, and quiet. I knew the peace wouldn't last forever. I knew they would find me eventually. You can't erase yourself completely in the digital age, no matter how hard you try. But I expected a phone call or maybe a lawyer's letter. I didn't expect Mark to show up in my driveway. It was a Tuesday afternoon, around 3 p.m. I was sitting on the porch swing, reading a book and sipping Earl Grey tea. The air was chilly, a sharp contrast to the humid soup of Florida, and I loved it. Then I heard the crunch of gravel. My cabin is at the end of a long, winding driveway. I watched as a dusty gray sedan pulled up the hill. My stomach gave a little lurch, just a reflex, but I tamped it down immediately. I knew that car. It was Mark's Accord. He parked haphazardly, 2 wheels on the grass, like he had skidded to a halt. He got out, and he looked terrible. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he had the desperate, frantic energy of a man who had just driven 10 hours on caffeine and rage. He marched up the wooden steps of the porch. He didn't see me sitting on the swing at first. He went straight to the front door and pounded on it with his fist. Mom, open up. I know you're in there. I'm right here, Mark, I said calmly. He spun around. When he saw me, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. I wasn't the frantic, stressed woman he had last seen in Florida. I was calm. I was holding a teacup. I looked rested. He breathed out. He stormed over to where I was sitting. You're hard to find. That was the point, I said. I didn't stand up. I didn't offer him a hug. I stayed right where I was. How did you find me? I asked. He reached into his back pocket and crumpled a piece of paper in my face. It was a letter from the Sarasota Title Company, a final closing disclosure regarding a small escrow refund. They mailed this to my house, Mark said, his voice shaking. A clerical error. They had me listed as the secondary contact from when Dad died. It had your new forwarding address on the bottom. Ah, I said, taking a sip of tea. Well, accidents happen. Accidents. Mark shouted. His voice echoed off the trees, disturbing the birds. You call this an accident? You sold the house, Mom. You sold everything. Vernell is losing her mind. She's been screaming for 2 weeks. Do you know what you've put us through? I set my teacup down on the side table. I haven't put you through anything, Mark. I simply moved. You disappeared, he yelled. You blocked our numbers. You didn't tell us where you were going. We thought something had happened to you. And then we find out you sold the family home to some investment company for cash. Why? Why would you do that? He moved toward the door, reaching for the handle. I need to come in. I need a drink. I've been driving since 4 a.m. No, I said. The word hung in the air. Mark stopped, his hand hovering over the doorknob. He looked back at me, confused. What? You are not coming in, I said. My voice was low, but it was steel. This is my home. It is a space for me. It is not a space for you to bring your anger or Vernell's drama or your accusations. You can say what you need to say right here on the porch, and then you can leave. Mark looked as if I had slapped him. I'm your son. And I'm your mother, I said. But that title doesn't give you the right to invade my peace anymore. He slumped against the railing, the fight draining out of him just a little. How could you do this to us, Mom? You abandoned your family. You abandoned your grandchildren. I didn't abandon you, Mark, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I saved myself. He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. Let me finish. For years, I have been a guest house. I have been a storage unit for Vernell's hoard. I have been a babysitter, a chef, a maid, and an ATM. I was the person you came to when you needed something, and the person you ignored when Vernell decided to be disrespectful. Mark looked down at his shoes. That's not true. It is true, I said. You stood there and watched her treat me like furniture. You told me I was selfish for wanting one holiday to myself. You told me to let her have her way because it was easier for you. Well, Mark, I decided to make it easy for everyone. I removed the problem. I removed myself. But the house. Mark stammered. Vernell, she thought. She thought she was waiting me out. I said brutally. I heard her, Mark. I heard her tell her sister that they were just waiting for me to get too old so they could shove me in the guest suite and take over. I wasn't going to wait around to be evicted in my own home. Mark's face went pale. He hadn't known that part, or maybe he had suspected it and chose to ignore it. So here is the new reality. I continued. I am not a victim. I am a woman who is enjoying her retirement. I have enough money from the sale to live comfortably for the rest of my life. I have security here, and I have silence. I stood up then, wrapping my cardigan tighter around me. I am your mother, Mark. I will always love you. But since you wouldn't respect me as a person, you can now respect me as a distant relative. We can talk on the phone once a month. We can FaceTime on holidays. But you do not show up here unannounced. And Vernell, she is never allowed on this property. If she shows up, I will call the police for trespassing. And I mean that. Mark stared at me. He looked for the woman who used to bake cookies and apologize for taking up space. He didn't find her. He found Lydia Biggins, homeowner, survivor, and woman of the mountains. He looked at the cabin, small, warm, inviting. He looked at the piece I had found. And then he thought about what he had to go back to in Sarasota. He had to go back to a furious wife, a messy house, and the realization that his buffer was gone. She's going to divorce me, Mark whispered. It wasn't a threat. It was a realization. Without your money and your help, she's going to leave. That, I said softly, is between you and your wife. I can't fix your marriage, Mark. I can only fix my life. He stood there for a long minute. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. He nodded slowly. A defeat. A resignation. Okay, he said. Okay, Mom. He turned around and walked back down the steps. He looked older than he had when he arrived. He got into his dusty car, backed out of my driveway, and drove down the mountain. I watched him go until the gray car disappeared around the bend. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sad. I felt a profound sense of closure. The cord was cut. He was on his own, and so was I. I sat back down on the swing, picked up my tea, and looked out at the mountains. The sun was starting to set, turning the sky a brilliant shade of violet. It was going to be a cold night. I looked forward to lighting a fire, just for me. It has been 6 months since Mark drove down my mountain, leaving a trail of dust and disappointment behind him. 6 months of waking up when I want, eating what I want, and, most importantly, locking my door knowing that no one on the other side has a key. People ask me if I get lonely. They assume that a woman of my age, living alone in a cabin in the woods, must be pining for her family. They imagine I sit by the window waiting for the phone to ring. They couldn't be more wrong. The silence isn't empty. It's full. It's full of peace. It's full of the freedom to leave a book on the coffee table and find it exactly where I left it 3 days later. My relationship with my son has shifted into a new, strictly defined shape. We have a contract unspoken but ironclad. Every Sunday at 4 p.m., I sit down with my iPad and FaceTime my grandchildren. There are rules. Mark knows them. The first time we tried this, Vernell popped her head into the frame. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask how I was. She just said, "So, are you done with this midlife crisis yet? We really need you to take the kids for spring break." I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I simply pressed the red end call button. Mark called back immediately, frantic. "Mom, don't hang up." "I told you," I said calmly. "I am visiting with my grandchildren. If your wife appears on the screen, or if I hear her voice in the background making comments, the visit is over. Try again next week." It only took 2 weeks of me hanging up on them for the message to sink in. Now, when I call, Vernell is conspicuously absent. She goes to Starbucks or the mall, or wherever she goes to complain about me. I get 20 minutes of Sammy telling me about his Minecraft worlds and Chloe showing me her drawings. I love them. I miss them. But I love myself enough to know that I cannot set myself on fire just to keep them warm. And speaking of warmth, or the lack thereof, the silent revenge I hoped for has blossomed in ways I didn't even expect. You see, when you remove the foundation of a house, the cracks start to show very quickly. Mark calls me occasionally during the week, usually on his drive home from work. He sounds tired. He sounds like a man who is realizing just how expensive life actually is. Last week, he let it slip. We had to pull the kids out of private swimming lessons. He muttered. "Oh," I said, taking a sip of my herbal tea. "Why is that?" "Money is tight," he admitted. "Vernell is, well, she's stressed. We didn't realize how much we were saving on groceries when we ate at your place 3 nights a week. And the after-school care costs a fortune. We used to just drop them off with you. Now we have to pay a center. I didn't offer to send a check. I didn't offer to come back and help. I just nodded. "That sounds difficult, Mark." I said, "Welcome to budgeting." I found out later from a mutual friend back in Sarasota that they also had to cancel their annual trip to Cabo. Apparently, without my selfish hoarding of resources, and without me quietly paying for the flights like I usually did, the math didn't work. Vernell wanted my house because she thought it was a gold mine. She didn't realize that I was the gold mine. And now that the mine is closed, she's left digging in the dirt. I take no malicious joy in their struggle, but I do feel a sense of vindication. They didn't value my contribution until it was gone. That is a lesson they will have to learn the hard way. As for me, I haven't just been sitting on my porch. I decided that if I was going to live in the mountains, I should probably see them. I saw a flyer at the local library for a group called the Silver Hikers. It's a walking group for seniors. I was nervous the first time I went. I thought everyone would be fit, active couples who had been hiking for decades. I showed up at the trailhead in my brand new hiking boots, feeling a little ridiculous. But then I met Sarah. Sarah is 72. She drives a Subaru, has gray hair cut in a bob, and hikes with a walking stick that has a bell on it to scare away bears. We started walking, and within a mile we started talking. I told her a condensed version of my story, the daughter-in-law, the invasion, the escape. Sarah stopped walking. She looked at me, threw her head back, and laughed, a loud, cackling laugh that echoed off the trees. "Sister," she said, clapping a hand on my shoulder, "you are my hero. My son's wife tried to move her mother into my basement last year. I sold the house and moved into a yurt for 6 months just to prove a point. I laughed until my sides hurt. I realized then that I wasn't alone. There is a whole army of us out there, women who have spent their lives nurturing, accommodating, and sacrificing only to realize that we have one life left to live, and we intend to live it for ourselves. I go hiking twice a week now. My legs are stronger than they've been in 20 years. My lungs feel clear. I have a circle of friends who don't want anything from me other than my company and maybe a recipe for zucchini bread. We don't talk about our ungrateful children. We talk about books. We talk about politics. We talk about which birdseed attracts the best cardinals. Tonight, as I narrate this final chapter to you, I am sitting in my living room. It's a cold night in North Carolina. The wind is howling outside, rattling the window panes, but inside it is warm. I have a fire crackling in the stone fireplace. The orange glow lights up the room. My husband's urn is on the mantel, right where he belongs. I have a glass of red wine in my hand, a bottle I bought for myself, not for a party, not for guests. I look around this small cabin. It doesn't have a grand dining room. It doesn't have white carpets that need constant vacuuming. It doesn't have a guest suite for people who are waiting for me to die. It has peace. I think back to that day in Sarasota when Mark called me selfish. It hurt so much at the time. It felt like a betrayal. But sitting here now, watching the flames dance, I realize he was right. I was selfish. Finally, I chose myself. And looking back at the road that led me here, the 700 miles of highway, the blocked phone numbers, the scorched earth, I know one thing for certain. It was the best decision I ever made. Ladies, have you ever felt like a stranger in your own home? Would you have the courage to drive 700 miles to find yourself again? Let me know in the comments. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.